Support for the Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you in part by University of Idaho, Idaho's only Carnegie R1 classified research university. Our Carnegie R1 designation recognizes the discoveries we make that help our forests thrive. It means we're creating more doctors and doing real research to strengthen cybersecurity for Idaho businesses, our energy sector, and every Idahoan. More at go.uidaho.edu/Idaho-is-Idaho.
We're asking for your help to share stories from all of Idaho's 44 counties, like this one on the Spencer Opal Mines, where we learned about their unique pink opals.
The pink is from an iron and manganese deposit. Like typically what you would see that turns those beautiful pools colors in Yellowstone is what gives our opal those fancy background colors.
You can send your ideas to Idaho Matters at boisestate.edu and then listen for our Idaho 44 project weekdays at noon and 8 on Idaho Matters.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Samantha Wright, filling in for Gemma Gaudette. It's Idaho Matters, and it's Friday. That means it's time for our Reporter Roundtable, when we get you up to date on all the news that made headlines this past week. Today, our panel includes Logan Finney with Idaho Reports on Idaho Public Television, James Dawson with Boise State Public Radio, Nate Eaton, news director at eastidahonews.com, and Sarah Cutler, reporter with the Idaho Statesman. Hello, 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 everyone.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Hi, guys.
Okay. Well, let's get started. It was a busy week. It was a very busy week. Monday marked the kickoff of the 2026 Idaho legislature with Governor Brad Little's State of the State speech. Jimmy, Sarah, Logan, let's start there. And Jimmy, give us a recap of what we heard from the governor.
Well, we heard that he apparently knows what 6'7" is by training a bunch of, single-digit young kids to yell it out during the speech. But in all seriousness, we kind of heard what we expected. Pretty minimal budgets with the state facing, a projected deficit, if the legislature doesn't take any action, which it has to under the Constitution. Maintenance budgets, we're not expecting significant growth from agencies. They were told to not include any new programs, defer any sort of vehicle or equipment replacements, things like that. So the governor tried to massage it as best as he could, saying that Idaho's economy is actually pretty strong. We've got great personal income growth numbers. We've got people still moving here, bringing their dollars and businesses with them, and really making the case for that, which I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but we might have seen a glimpse of that in the latest revenue report.
And we'll have that coming up. But Sarah, the governor also said in the speech that he wants to protect public education.
Yeah, I would say one of the top line messages in his speech was that he wants to protect K through 12 public school funding, as well as a vocational training program for college-age students called Idaho Launch. And he actually made a point of, highlighting that he called his speech Enduring Idaho, and he, was emphasizing that he wanted to keep whole things that can have an impact on the state's future, like, of course, education. I should note that focus, as we heard more and saw some of his proposed budget, which we'll get into later, I realize, but that focus, I think, was really on classroom funding, but virtual and online schooling does take more of a hit in his proposed budget.
And Jimmy, what else does the governor want to cut? I saw that the Idaho Transportation Department would get a big cut. How much and what else could be chopped?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the most significant part. It's $275 million from the Strategic Initiatives Fund, which is basically a program that helps pay for local highway projects in sort of a matching way. He has told reporters and other folks that during COVID, when we got a bunch of federal funds, a lot of that one-time money that we got from the federal government, he did, and the legislature, along with him, also put in $1.8 billion over several years to get maintenance backlogs kind of taken care of, fix bridges, do some pedestrian projects, mitigation, all of these other things. And so he's justifying this as, well, we put in a ton of money over the past several years. We need this to help kind of help us jump over a pothole right now as the economy kind of kicks into gear a little bit more after, years and years of back-to-back tax cuts have kind of diminished our revenue in a sense.
Yeah, and Sarah, you reported on some folks who were protesting the speech. Who were they, and what do they want?
Yeah, I would say starting that morning, well before the speech in the Capitol, in a few different locations, we saw I think at least two different groups of protesters. For those who have read Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale or are familiar with the show and have seen kind of those red outfits that people sometimes wear, we saw some women wearing those, holding up or wearing, I think, signs about Medicaid and wanting to protect Medicaid in the state. And then there were many more, I think, at least a couple hundred in the rotunda wearing T-shirts with the same goal. But I think, the question of what's going to happen to Medicaid this session will be a big one. Both the Medicaid expansion program, which uh, provides Medicaid access to lower income folks, and maybe to funding as well for folks on sort of regular Medicaid. Not to get too in the weeds, but basically, the costs of both programs have been rising very precipitously. And so there have been discussions in recent months of maybe some lawmakers have proposed cutting Medicaid expansion entirely, and at the same time, we've seen some trims or some more than trims to the existing reimbursements for providers who provide care to folks on Medicaid. So anyway, it's I think top of mind for a lot of folks, and that's why we saw some protesters come out as the fate of those programs is in question a bit.
And Logan, I know we're going to get into more about the Medicaid cuts on the other side of the break, but do you have any top line thoughts after watching the governor's speech? Because I know you did.
I did watch the governor's speech. I was also down there at the building that morning. And to Sarah's point about the protesters, it was a very active atmosphere around the Idaho State Capitol building. And I think that's also kind of shown us how state politics have changed over the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years. Back in the day, it used to be the State of the State Address Day. Was really the governor's day. It was the opportunity for the governor to come out and make his pitch about what Idaho needed to do for the year. Now it's a whole circus around that building. You've got the Idaho Republican Party holding a meeting, laying out their priorities. You've got the Mountain States Policy Center, a free market think tank, releasing the results of their polls. You've got, affinity groups like the Medicaid users coming out to lobby for their policy priorities. So it really shows us how Idaho politics has modernized and become more like national politics, where there's less deference given to the head of the state and his priorities or her priorities eventually. And really, everyone's there jockeying for a position and thinking about what they want to get done, even before the governor has taken the stage at the center of the day.
All right, we are not done with the legislature. We're going to come back to that. But first, Nate, it's been 50 years since the Teton Dam collapsed, killing 11 people. You had a very big story in East Idaho News. Take us back, set the stage before the collapse.
Yeah, one of the biggest disasters in East Idaho history. Hard to believe it's been 50 years. It was June of 1976. This was a dam that was a $100 million project. It had been approved by Congress. They were building dams all over the country at the time to help farmers, to help with power, save on, electricity. And this dam there were concerns raised before it was even finished. Basically, the foundation was compacted dirt and unstable canyon rock. And then once it was done, they rushed it into operation without any testing. And they filled it really fast, about a foot per day, and then it was doubled. And there were some concerns. In fact, the hours before the collapse, the reservoir was nearly filled to the capacity, and there wasn't any outlets or spill gates that were functioning. And so there were two contractors that were there at the site. They were trying in vain to plug up holes that they saw, and then it just cracked. It was a summer day just before noon when everything changed, and it was a massive, massive flood.
Okay, and in your story, you have some amazing archive video and a radio broadcast from 50 years ago. And I want to play just a couple of seconds of this. And for anybody in East Idaho, remember, this is archive tape from 50 years ago. It's not happening now, but let's just hear this as to what happened then.
Water is coming through on the north side of the dam, on the downstream side, and it's getting us more and more and more mud, dirt, water, and that whole downstream face on the north side of the dam is completely caving in. Now, there's going to be a lot of water come down the Teton River. As a matter of fact, it's coming down now. An awful lot of water is going to be coming down that Teton River. My advice, I haven't talked to police yet or bureau people here. I'm going to in a minute. But my advice to people downstream that are living along the Teton River to get your belongings. Get your belongings. Now look, Lisa, look. There goes the whole side. There goes the whole complete side of the north edge of the Teton Dam. And the water is monumental. Holy great. What can I say? People downstream better get out. People downstream better get out. Now back to the studio.
Okay, and remember, that was from 50 years ago. It's not happening now. Nate, tell us about this amazing tape that you have. Where did this come from? Who are we hearing?
It is, even though it was 50 years ago, you can feel that it's just terrifying to listen to that live radio report. This was KRXK, which was at the time Rick's College Radio, and they were live on the air. And what happened after that radio broadcast was 80 billion gallons of water spilled all across the area. There was it was devastating, and it happened so fast. How do you control that many gallons of water pouring out of this dam? And how do you get the word out? 50 years ago, when we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have live, television and internet, it was just a really harrowing day.
Wow. And as we said, 11 people died, but there's more to that. You reported 3,000 people were made homeless. And then the cleanup, what kind of there was a lot of aftermath to this, right? A lot of cleanup costs.
Right, over $2 billion, which that we figure would be about $11 billion today. It took months and months. In fact, there had been talk even about maybe shuttering Rick's College at the time, which is on the hill of Rexburg, before the flood. But the college actually served as kind of a sanctuary for people to go up, and they were spending the night in the buildings at the campus. They were being fed by the university or the college at the time. And a lot of people believe that maybe that's what saved the college, which went on to become BYU Idaho, which is a 4-year university now. But it was just you look at the photos from those times, and there's just it's hard to believe that that's Rexburg and Sugar City and all of those cities in East Idaho.
And did I read there's actually talk of rebuilding the dam?
Yeah, it's interesting. They've talked about this for some time, or the idea's been floated, but now Kevin Cook, our senator from Idaho Falls, is sponsoring a resolution to look at different water storage projects, and rebuilding the dam is one of 6 proposed projects. He's really stressing that there need to be a study. But things have advanced so far now that we have new technology, we have new ways that can be looked at, that he believes the dam could be built in the same spot and be much safer, which could be an interesting thing if it actually happens.
Wow. And as I said, incredible article from East Idaho News. We're going to link to it on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org. Before we go to break, Logan, I wanted to get this in real quick. Idaho was center stage at the U.S. Supreme Court this week. What's the case and what happened?
Yes, we were. Idaho's Solicitor General, that's the top courtroom attorney in Idaho Attorney General Labrador's office. Solicitor Alan Hurst was before the U.S. Supreme Court this week defending a state law that was passed in 2020 called the Fairness in Women's Sports Act. This was an act by the legislature adding to Idaho state law a ban basically on transgender girls and women from participating in female sports teams on public schools, so all the way from elementary school up through college. A transgender Boise State University student named Lindsay Hecox, who wished to join the cross-country team, the women's cross-country team at BSU, filed suit challenging the constitutionality of the law. Now here we are almost 6 years since the law was actually passed, and the case was combined with a similar case dealing with I believe, cisgender high school student who's just referred to as Jane Doe out of West Virginia. And so this case was before the court. Idaho is making its arguments, Hecox attorneys and the other attorneys making their arguments that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment protects against the kind of screening and categorical exemptions for transgender people categorical ban on transgender people participating in sports. The arguments were this week. The Supreme Court typically does not put out decisions in these cases until around the middle of summer is when usually those come out. So we don't have a resolution yet, but we will likely very soon know whether states are allowed to pass these kind of state laws like Idaho's. And Idaho is the first state in the nation to pass such a law like this in 2020. It was a project of State Representative Barbara Ehart from Idaho Falls. She's very passionate about women's sports, has spent time as a women's basketball coach, and she's been traveling the country in recent years talking about this as a both a political topic and policy topic, helping coach other states. And I believe it's more than half of the states that have a similar policy in place now.
Let's head back to the legislature. Jimmy, JFAC met for the first time this week. What is JFAC? And what did the committee's new co-chair say about the governor's budget?
Yeah, great question. JFAC stands for Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. Just think of it as the legislature's budget committee made up of members from both the House and Senate. And the new co-chair, Josh Tanner, he's a Republican from Eagle, replaced Representative Wendy Horman, former Representative Wendy Horman, who's now in D.C. working for Alex Adams, who was also a former Idaho state government, budget director, and wore a lot of other hats as well. So Representative Tanner took kind of a highly unusual step in releasing a press release on Tuesday, slamming the governor's budget. He said that it is structurally unbalanced, and that, quote, it's made up of, quote, one-time gimmicks, spends more than the state takes in on an ongoing basis, and leaves Idaho with the lowest ending fund balance in nearly a decade. These are things that maybe we hear toward the middle or end of the legislative session, not the second day of the legislature. Usually lawmakers like to kind of keep relations up a little bit higher on the second day of school, as it were, but not Josh Tanner. He especially took exception to these one-time transfers that we talked about with the local transportation grants funding, the interest income that the governor wants to take from some very high dollar funds and use that for general fund spending. But then also this thing called tax conformity, which is usually a pretty snooze fest of a bill most years, where it's just like, yeah, we agree with whatever the federal tax changes that were passed, what in any given year, it's fine. But this year, because of the one big beautiful bill, there are several different components that are going to take up potentially a lot of money out of Idaho's tax revenue stream. The governor expects that number to be about $155 million, which is about halfway between the range given to him by the state tax commission. But Representative Tanner wants, he thinks we should estimate that to be at the higher end of that range instead, and more deeply cut the budget just in case, things don't recover as quickly as they're expected to. It's interesting too, because just yesterday, this subcommittee of JFAC on which he sits that kind of estimates revenue, he voted to support this target that's about $150 million higher than what Little put forward in his budget. So on one hand, he's expecting revenue to come in significantly higher than what the governor's, trying to budget for, but he also wants to cut even more deeply than the governor does.
Okay, so and this is going to be, I think, a big chunk of controversy in the legislature is how much money we have coming in and how much money that may or may not come in. And so I wanted to add in Royce McCandless. He's the State House reporter at the Idaho Press. And I wanted him to come on right here and talk about his in-depth story on what lawmakers and economists are predicting for our economy coming up. And Royce, welcome to the show. Give us an overview of what you found in your reporting.
Yeah, so out of the gate this year, Governor Little has been saying that he is betting on Idaho's economy for his budget framework to ultimately come together. we saw state revenues decline pretty significantly in fiscal year 2026. They're projected to be down about 6% on the year. And now Little's saying that, heading into fiscal year 2027, we should be more optimistic, looking at something in the range of 3% growth. That, of course, doesn't factor in the cost of the big, beautiful bill. When you factor that federal change in, it shrinks to about a 0.8% growth, but growth nonetheless. And yeah, what we heard in Revenue Assessment Committee yesterday is that there's reason to be more optimistic. They voted on a 10-8 line to put a revenue number that's about 2-3% higher than what Little was projecting. As Dawson said, that's about 150 million higher than in Little's budget. So that's pretty significant. Tanner indicated that there's more reason to be optimistic in Idaho's economy. He's saying that the tightening that we saw in the past year has largely gone away, and we're expecting to see a rebound. But there is still some discord in that committee just about, are we being too optimistic? We heard from a few about how, putting a revenue number too high could put us in the same situation that we are this year. We're facing budget cuts. This was a position held by Senator Blaylock, saying that, if we're too optimistic, we could be upside down just as we are this year. Interestingly, when we look at the wider economic trends, they're pretty disparate when looking at the nation and the state of Idaho. Economists that the committee heard from were saying that the nation is kind of a mixed bag. We're seeing an increase in GDP and an uptick in unemployment at the same time. Idaho is quite a bit different. Idaho GDP is increasing, and we're seeing an increase, or rather a stability in unemployment. Idaho's unemployment is sitting at about 3.7%, and that's been steady for the past few years, with the exception of a few months during COVID. So they're projecting strength in that arena. Notably, though, Idaho's economy isn't going to be as red hot as it has been in recent years. We saw pretty significant wage growth in 2022 and 2023. And Idaho labor economists said that has since moderated. So we're not going to quite see the red hot growth that we've had in those years, but there are positive signs in that respect. When looking at agriculture, however, it's much more of a mixed bag. In the past year, we've seen cattle and livestock cash receipts increase pretty dramatically. But on the crop side, it's been much more negative. Potatoes, sugar beets, barley, these have all been down in the past year. And interestingly, a lot of those trade negotiations for crops, those are done a year in advance. And so while we did have a net 3 billion exports for agriculture, we haven't really seen the effects of the national tariff policy yet. How that factors into agriculture negotiations, that's expected to play out in this calendar year. So whether or not we see the record, 3 billion exports this year, it really that's a question mark in that area.
Royce, I'm hearing a lot of maybe good, maybe bad, a lot of confusion there. But as Jimmy said, the legislature has to pick a number and then stick with it because we have to have a balanced budget.
Right. And interestingly, JFAC sort of punted the decision on the revenue number to next week. That was on the docket for today, but yeah, we won't hear their position on that as of yet. But it would have huge implications on if we were on the too optimistic end. Is the state going to have to make deeper cuts if their budget setting isn't where it needs to be as it was in the past year?
And Sarah, Royce is talking about wage growth slowing down in the state. You also had a story about how Governor Little is not proposing a raise for state employees. What did he say there? And how does that mix in? Because I know they're seeing higher health costs this year.
That's right. So the governor's proposed budget does propose to hold state employee salaries flat this year, even though the state's Division of Human Resources found in December that state employee salaries were already a fair amount behind the market. So this choice, as you can imagine, presents some problems for recruiting and retaining state employees. Yeah, I actually asked the governor about that concern about retention, and he kind of tried to reframe a bit. And he said, even if the state would be holding salaries flat, it's also spending quite a bit more on employees' benefits, particularly health insurance, as health insurance nationwide, the costs continue to rise. So the state is going to see its costs there increase about 15% in the next fiscal year. But to your question, that doesn't mean that the state is eating that whole cost increase. So the employees themselves, in their own contributions to their healthcare plans, are going to see, I believe it's an average of about a 9% increase in what they have to contribute to their health care plans. And Democratic Senator Janie Ward Engelking pointed out that in that case, you're holding salaries flat, even as healthcare costs increase, that's kind of a de facto salary cut.
And Logan, I know Idaho Reports is a half hour, but I'm going to give you 3 minutes to talk about how you drill down into possible Medicaid cuts. Talk about cutting preventative care and what your guests on the show told you.
Sure. I spoke this week with Representative Monica Church of Boise. She is the new caucus chair for the Democrats in the House, as well as Representative Doug Pickett, who's the new assistant majority leader with the Republicans. He's taking over for Representative Josh Tanner, who stepped up into that JFAC chair like we were talking about. In the governor's budget address and his budget presentation to the legislature this year, cutting Medicaid expansion is not something the governor is proposing. He's giving the lawmakers about $45 million in savings is what he's pitching to them. Half of that would come from extending a current rate cut to providers who provide Medicaid services, and the other half of that would come from trimming services, things like dental, things like speech therapy and physical therapy and occupational therapy, things like in-home care services for people with developmental disabilities who really can't function day to day without people helping to take care of them. So Little is presenting this kind of suite of options to the legislature. Here are things from Medicaid that we could cut. This is one of those things in Representative Tanner's pretty scathing statement about the governor's budget proposal. He says Little said we should make some cuts in Medicaid and then left all the difficult decisions to the legislature about what those cuts should actually be. So we were talking on Idaho Reports with Representative Pickett in Church, and they really made the point that preventative care is where the state can get the most bang for its buck. If you are helping people who need Medicaid cover their dental insurance, that's a lot more cost effective than not covering dental like we did after the Great Recession to save money and ending up with a whole bunch of people in the emergency room with really severe oral health problems that were far more expensive for the state to take care of. So those are going to be some of the conversations that lawmakers are having as they're looking at the budget this year. Education and Medicaid are the two largest sections of the budget if we're looking at it as a pie chart. And those two are also the fastest growing portions of the budget, and that has a lot of lawmakers really worried. So some Republicans especially say we should just get rid of Medicaid expansion because it is putting the whole Medicaid program on an unsustainable trajectory. And if we're having to cut other things to preserve Medicaid expansion, maybe it would be a better use of our time and resources and state dollars in a really limited budget year to put those dollars toward those more critical traditional Medicaid services rather than someone who a Republican House member would characterize as a working, an able-bodied, able to work single individual rather than someone who is, uses a wheelchair and needs someone to come to their house to help them get in and out of bed in the morning.
I got to tell you, I keep reading all of this and thinking of deja vu about when we did cut preventative care in Medicaid and the effects that had. I want to thank all you budget experts for giving us an update on this. And I want to pivot to Nate because the old Idaho Falls water tower is coming down. Tell us this story.
This water tower has been here in Idaho Falls for nearly 90 years. It's kind of iconic if you
Wow.
look at any photos or pictures or paintings of the Idaho Falls. You generally see the red, white, and blue water tower in the background. Several years ago, the city said that it's just too much to maintain. There's lead paint on it. There's safety issues with it. That if they were to restore it, it would cost more than actually building a new one. Plus, it doesn't hold the water it needed for a growing community. And so the decision was made a few years ago to have it come down. And just this week, they've started to disassemble it. The new one has been built and has been swapped over. So the water is coming out of that one. And just yesterday, they actually took off the lid. So it kind of looks interesting if you're driving by. It's a water tower without a top. And in the next few days, it will be coming down completely.
Wow. Okay, Nate, this story is really, really scary. There's a little girl in Idaho Falls, and the left side of her body is shrinking, and doctors have no idea why. Who is this girl? How did this start?
Yeah, this is one of those baffling medical mysteries. Her name's Valerie Jensen. Just a few months ago, September, she started complaining about her legs, and a lot of parents would think it's just growing pains. You're 6 years old, you're going to be growing. Her mom said that she would cry all night long and just was in pain all the time and started limping around. And one day, when she was getting ready for a shower, her mom took off her socks and noticed that one of her toes was a different color, like a weird purple color, and there was bruises all over her legs from the knees down. So they started to take her to the doctor, one doctor after another. She got tested for all sorts of blood disorders, even leukemia, and it came back and negative. There was nothing. Um, so it led to trips to Primary Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City, and they discovered that her right leg was actually a full inch shorter than her left, and that she had these weird spots on her body. She saw, name the specialist, and she's seen the specialist, and it turns out that she has some sort of what's called hemiatrophy. And it's a condition that causes the underdevelopment or shrinkage of one side of the body, but it doesn't explain all of her symptoms. This is where they're trying to figure out what's going on. Like she has muscle wasting and bones that aren't growing on different parts of her body. So this family is just trying to figure out what's going on while their cute little girl goes through all of this pain.
And you actually have a picture in the story of her legs that shows how the left leg has gotten smaller than the right leg. And it's not just the legs, right? It's the whole left side of her body.
It's the whole left side. Her right foot, the foot that's being affected by this, looks, skeleton-like. There's not any muscle on it, hardly any muscle on it at all anymore. The good news is, at least for the family at this point, is the University of Utah has accepted her into a research program that will hopefully lead to some answers. But it's a multiple year study, so it's going to be kind of they're in it for the long haul. They're taking DNA samples, they're comparing chromosomes, things like that, comparing her to other people that have been through this. And of course, the family is, having to support this financially to try to find out the answers that they could do. And they're trying to give her the best little childhood that they can and get her outside and get her out, doing things she loves to do. But hopefully they can find out what's going on and make this so her body is functionable as it can be.
And you reported that people can help, right? There's a GoFundMe, I think.
Yeah, there's a GoFundMe for the family that we have a link there that you can donate to, and that's to help, help this little girl. They're asking for $5,000. It's raised a little over 4,100, so it's getting there. People are coming forward and and donating, and hopefully in a few months, Samantha, I'll be back on saying they found out the problem and she's good to go.
Oh, man, I hope so. That is just really scary stuff. Okay, Jimmy, back to the legislature because it's that time of year. The Legislative Services Office did an audit of Idaho colleges to find out if they're complying with the new DEI rules. So what did they find out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the top line takeaway is that, these four-year colleges and universities are pretty much mostly in compliance with the law. And there are several different pieces of that law, we should say. So one relates to, these colleges and universities cannot spend state funds on any sort of DEI related activity. They can't use DEI principles in hiring or admissions. And within curriculum, it can't be used in classes, with a few exceptions, um, in classes where they're required to, you know, be taken by students in order to graduate with that major. Now, there are exceptions, and you can apply for waivers for things like, gender studies, or, University of Idaho has Black study courses and things like that. So those are exempted, but, by and large, that's not allowed. But what the audit found was, Lewis Clark State College in Lewiston actually had nothing flagged in, their review. The audit team from the Legislative Services Office found nothing wrong with Lewis Clark State College. They also found nothing wrong as it relates to admissions or spending state funds for DEI related activities in any of the colleges or universities. They did have a couple things crop up, though.
Well, give us an idea of just one or two of those issues that did crop up. What kind of things are we talking about?
Yeah, so U of I think had the most things cited. There were a few educational courses related to education majors about teaching diverse groups of students and lesson planning, things like that. Several of those classes were related to an optional certificate that it's not needed for a major; it's just an optional certification. And the other one they say is required for national accreditation, which every university in the state, if they want a nationally accredited program, needs to have. Other than that, ISU had a couple things with old staff postings where listed under minimum qualifications for a professor position, you would have to demonstrate that you have worked with minorities or something in that realm. ISU for its part said that these were somehow missed during their initial review of those. They have been taken down and scrubbed of that language, and that will not be included moving forward.
All right. We're about to celebrate the 250th anniversary of America, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that after the break. But Nate, Blackfoot is also celebrating a birthday this year. How old is the city of Blackfoot?
125 years old. I don't know very many people who are 125, but Blackfoot is. And it's going to be a year of celebration. Blackfoot probably is most known for the Eastern Idaho State Fair, which is a big deal. If you've never been, you should. Everybody comes from all over the place to go to the fair every September. But this year they're celebrating their birthday. It was founded in 1901, a small settlement mainly focused on agriculture and the railroad, and being close to the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. It's quite a nice little town, and so any excuse to have a party, 125 years is a big excuse and a good excuse.
Well, and this is going to be like a year-long thing, right? There's a lot of events planned.
Yeah, the first one is tomorrow night, 6:30 at the Mountain View Middle School. They're going to have a bonfire. They're going to have a patriotic program, historical reflections, and they really want to celebrate it throughout the year. So there'll be events every month or so, every couple months, where the community is invited to come out and celebrate. They want to do a big thing at the fair. The next celebration will be in February. And of course, you mentioned the 250th birthday for the country. It's kind of nice how they coincide. Just take 250, cut it in half, and that you'll end up in Blackfoot.
Nate, I really wanted to end on this story because we've had some kind of heavy news today. But tell me a little bit about the 250th. We mentioned the country is turning 250 years old this year. Turns out Idaho is planning some serious parties. So tell us about the 250,000 acts of service plan. That's hard to say. Tell us about it.
Right. This is they're calling it the Idaho Service Challenge. And the goal is to have Idahoans complete 250,000 acts of service through July 4th. And so Just Serve is partnering with America 250 for this project. And next week, Representative Brandon Mitchell is going to introduce a resolution in the Idaho legislative session about the 250,000 Acts of Service initiative. And they're saying it can be anything. It can be intentional and measurable acts of service over the next 6 months. There's a website that's been launched for service activities. There's another part of the website where you can track what you're doing. And they really are hoping that it can be a way for people to promote volunteerism across the state, acts of kindness, and to reach out and help nonprofits or other people that might need a hand.
And Idaho Falls is the pilot spot for the program.
Yeah, there was a meeting over the weekend with several nonprofits like the Community Food Basket, other nonprofits in the area. The leaders of these organizations got together to talk about what they do, how they help the community. We hear an awful lot about, the food bank or teen pregnancy centers, but a lot of times we don't know exactly what they do or how they're funded. These guys got together and they talked about what they do in this Idaho Falls meeting. And the goal is to help the community understand them so that we can, reach out and help those in times of need.
And things have already started. You have pictures of something called cake kits in the story. What else does Eastern Idaho have planned?
Yeah, so a cake kit, I hadn't thought about this, but, a lot of families go to the food bank to get food for their families, canned items or cereal or whatever. Well, these families have birthdays and they could use a cake. They could use that. So it's a simple cake kit, like a cake mix with a frosting and candles that you can just pick up, and it's all in one. But there's other types of things like feminine hygiene kits for girls in Africa, for volunteers to help sew. There's craft fairs. There's dolls or toys that you can make for kids in need. There's all sorts of service project activities. A lot of them we wouldn't even think of, but there's a lot of fun ways too that you can serve. So they're encouraging people to get together with their neighborhoods, with their school groups, with church groups, whoever you want, and do these 250,000 acts of service.
Wow. And in the just over a minute left, tell me about Martha taught washing tater.
You always got to have a potato tie. You know it.
Yeah.
So this is a depiction, like a little doll of the nation's first lady, Martha Washington. She's the official mascot of America 250 in Idaho. Probably hadn't heard that, but she is. There's a doll, and Martha Washington, during the Revolutionary War, she helped the soldiers. And served and was a great example for that. So they're using her as the role model for the 250,000 acts of service. And you can read more about her. There's also a website with service ideas, with activities, with ways to track it. It's idahokindness.com. And you can go on there and simply click add an act of service. You can look for ideas on there. So far, as of now, as of this taping right now, 79 acts have been performed, Samantha. So maybe by the end of the day, it might be up to 80. So yeah, they're tracking them, and it'll be cool if Idaho can kind of lead the nation in service.
All right, we got to get up to 250,000. Wow, Nate, thank you. This has been great.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Logan Finney with Idaho Reports on Idaho Public Television, James Dawson with Boise State Public Radio News, Nate Eaton, news director at eastidahonews.com, and Sarah Cutler, reporter with the Idaho Statesman. We also heard from Royce McCandless with the Idaho Press. Please check out their stories. We'll put links to some of those on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org.
I'm Gemma Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters.
Looking for another podcast to listen to? Check out The Nature of Idaho from our partner station KISU in Eastern Idaho. Join hosts Peter Pruitt and Dr. Leif Tapanilla as they share fascinating stories from the Gem State's great outdoors, celebrating Idaho's wildlife, landscape, and natural wonders. That's The Nature of Idaho from KISU. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.